you know, like when kids start, man, they're like wet noodles, right? They really can't move. They have no stability there. What is like the first start when you get a young kid, let's say 8 years old? What are you doing with them? Like, how are you progressing them?
Yeah. So now, and usually an 8-year-old, it all depends on the setting, of course. But so if you told me an ideal setting that maybe I'm going to see a 7 or 8-year-old for a regular amount of time. If you told me I was going to see a 7, 8-year-old for 10 or 20 years to be able to train them for that long, that would be spectacular. But that's rarely the case. General coordination is going to be a big piece. And really, I would say in my time at North Texas, really, of all my time, I tell any young coach that the thing that I feel I got the most out of from an educational standpoint was what I learned from a tremendous class in grad school about motor skill acquisition, motor development, and just motor learning. So in the way that I program, I almost think more along the lines of that than of X's and O's. And now that's not to say that we don't have a board like this that we're designing programs. But at the same time, it's, okay, so what is the, whether it be a gross motor skill or something a little more fine, what is it that we want to develop, and how do we get that? How do we get there? So we work backward from that point. So the earlier, now you might have a 7 or 8-year-old. Honestly, 7 or 8-year-olds should be the best at some of those skills that, like, it's almost easier to catch those 7 or 8-year-olds than it is a 17 or 18-year-old. Because when I have a 7 or 8-year-old and I tell them to skip or gallop, they don't look at me like I'm crazy. When I tell a 17-year-old that's got a Georgia offer, and I ask them to gallop, they look at me like I'm crazy. But it's an important, to me, it's an important skill that is not just. It's not just because we want to feel like we have more coordination. It's not necessarily only that. There's higher levels that we can advance some of those movements, those general coordination movements that can be taken to a higher level. So really thinking in terms of that, so any skill that we want to progress towards, it's not too early for a 7 or 8-year-old to be thinking towards what we want them to be doing in the weight room either. So and now that doesn't mean taking a PVC and taking them through a squat progression that I might take a 14 or 15-year-old. But you can kind of sprinkle in some squat patterning through some, hurdle step unders that are, disguised as an obstacle course and things like that. Just ways for kids to enjoy their time and develop some of those really general skills. So
you're still working the adaptations necessary, but you're making it fun. You're making it interesting for the kid.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Yeah. I think with the kids, obviously they're more apt to learning and developing, as opposed to you already trying to reevaluate or retangle a bad motor pattern with the older kids. And you see that with those 16, 17, 18-year-old kids. And then, so if you get a high school kid, right, and he's just coming to you and you're trying to develop and getting them ready for the next level, right? What are the major things that you are assessing them when they come into, the gym?
Yeah, so hopefully that kid, it might be different if it's a student that is going to come in and train as a member of one of our school's teams in sports versus a 15-year-old whose parents called me and said they want to do some form of one-on-one training. Obviously, when we got one-on-one, you can talk to that more than I can. We have the opportunity to get a little more specific. In my general all-encompassing programming, we want that young man or young woman to come up to speed at a pace of their own, but also be ready to train with the group. So it really does all depend on what the kind of just the needs analysis, what the expectation is from the parents, from the kid, what they want to get out of it. If it's just a once a week or a couple times a month, like speed session, that's a completely different conversation too. So is it something, is the kid a track kid or really any sport, and their parent asks me, I want to help my kid get faster? Is it a kid that, and it could also be based on what their, not just their genetic makeup, but some other kind of measures, such as body type. Are they more of a twitchy kid? Are they more of a muscly type kid? And seeing how we can, we never want to me, I think something that I failed to do early on was I identified kids and said that's their strength. We don't necessarily need to work on their strength. Let's pick up their weaknesses.
That's interesting.
We always want to pick up their weaknesses.
Yeah.
If you look at the best of the best, there's a reason why they're so great, and usually it's because of that strength that they have. Yeah, of course, you always have the some guys and gals that are just so well developed in a variety of areas. But more often than not, that top athlete in any given sport has that something to them that makes them special. So
for sure,
finding that, finding if a kid's just a mover in such a way. Again, if a kid's more of a fascially or tendon driven athlete, we want to bring those strengths out of them versus just training, running our head against the wall, trying to only focus on the weaknesses.